Hi, and welcome to the Embouchure Project podcast, where we bring together the finest minds in the world to help understand the complex system that is the embouchure. The Embouchure Project represents a network of neurologists, scientists, physical therapists, psychologists, and pedagogues. The goal is to help define what a healthy embouchure is, what we can do to optimize the embouchure, and to deal with problems as they arise. A lot of our time will be devoted to embouchure dysfunction, from minor annoyances to debilitating forms of dystonia. We hope that all players, teachers and medical professionals will find this to be a rich resource. My name is Frankie Lacerdo. I'm a horn player with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, founder of Brass Rehab, and on faculty as a teacher at the University of Western Australia. Thank you for joining us. We hope you find this to be informative and helpful. The Embouchure Project would like to thank the Australian Society of Performing Arts Healthcare and the Glenn Gould School for their support. This episode is a podcast preview where we will outline what we hope to achieve through the Embouchure Project. In this mini episode, we will introduce you to Dr. Bronwen Ackermann, whose work forms the underpinning of the Embouchure Project. Dr. Ackermann is Associate Professor of Biomedical Science at the University of Sydney and the Sydney Medical School. She's a specialist in musicians' physiotherapy, musculoskeletal anatomy, and musicians' health. Her interest in performing arts health grew as a result of working with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra beginning in 1995. She's been active since then, researching and treating musicians' health, focusing on performance-related injury prevention, injury assessment and management, optimizing performance through enhancing physical and psychological well-being, and understanding the anatomical, physiological and biomechanical mechanisms underpinning musical performance. Bronwen's commitment to the world of music performance has saved and enhanced the careers of countless musicians, including my own. Let's meet her now. Hi, and welcome to the very first Embouchure Project podcast. We're labeling this as a podcast preview as we're getting started, and we want to give listeners an idea of the basic questions that we're going to be asking on these podcasts. But we'll go into much more detail in the future. So my name's Frankie Lacerdo. I'm fourth horn of the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, and I'm also on staff at UWA Conservatorium, so the University of Western Australia. 10 years ago, I had an injury, and we're lucky enough in Australia to have Dr. Bronwen Ackermann, who's one of the world leading researchers in musicians' injuries and health. I made a one-way trip to Sydney to see Bronwen, and she saved my career. So welcome, Bronwen.
Thank you.
Maybe you want to start by just giving us just a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, okay. I am a physiotherapist by training. I was working, as a lot of physios do, in elite athletic fields, so looking after very high-level athletes. And in our clinic, very early in my career, musicians started coming in alongside some other performing artists at the time, but because they felt like as sports physios, especially as elite physios, we would have more ability to apply our skills to musicians. I loved it. I've always loved music. I played some instruments, not any great prowess, so I admire those of you who can. And I actually had a soft palate injury playing the clarinet, which was rather a dramatic finish to that when I was in high school. So when I started working with musicians, I thought, oh, sure, it's like applying the principles of sports medicine. We can, they must learn how to do things to optimize the use of their body related to performance in a way that allows them to use their body to the best of their ability and also reduces the risk of things going wrong. And I must say the I had this misconception, and probably until I went on tour with Sydney Symphony Orchestra. So for the last 30 years, I've toured with orchestras where my job's been to keep them on stage, much like we do in sporting domains, make sure we look after players so they can keep playing. And orchestras, you don't have as many spares as sport, if you like. If the principal bassoon or something goes down with an injury, there's not a spare player of that level. So it actually is really important to look after these players representing our country at the highest level. And of course, within the country, I was actually shocked talking to the musicians on the first tour. I knew a lot of them, but I just didn't realise how little they got taught about how to look after their bodies and protect themselves and try to make the most of it in a way like we do these ideas of tapering, cross-training, getting strength, efficiency of movement, good mechanics of use, if you like. Is very standard practice nowadays in sports. But music, it was a bit like, I was quite shocked how little had been done in that field when I started. And my enthusiasm led me to doing a PhD on the topic of preventing musicians' injuries. And then I got a Churchill Fellowship that allowed me to travel the world to all the kind of major music medicine clinics. There weren't many at the time, but developed this sort of network of great colleagues and friends that sort of has helped to this day. In some ways it was interesting because I was doing a lot more than a lot of other people because I just didn't know there was any kind of, when you don't know what to do, you just dig deeper, learn how to base yourself base your approaches on, excellent skills, but also going back to fundamental, how the body works, like biomechanics, we call the physics of body motion. So when I was looking at working with musicians, I did a whole lot of research on how sound was produced. So I made sure that if I was telling someone to do something a certain way, that it made sense with what they needed to get a good sound out of their instrument. So it was a very long road, a very obsessive, lots of reading, lots of talking, lots of lovely musicians giving me lessons on every different instrument.
Yeah, great. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I remember at the end of our time, I was convinced I was going to buy you a trombone to, because you would always show me this perfect embouchure, and then you would never go to play something. It annoyed me. Yeah. So I want, for the listeners, so what is it? So from a medical point of view, what is an embouchure?
Well, I mean, from the very simplest definition that it came from, this sort of interface between a player's mouth and their instrument, a lot goes into the ability to control the aperture in a way where you let out the right amount of air with the right facial tension, if you like, to create, well, in the case of like brass instruments where your lips are the reed, they're going to interrupt the airstream to make the sound, and you have to have the right size aperture at the right tension to get the tones and the tension and the right sort of characters to the sound that you need. There's a lot going on to get to that outlet point, and yeah, it's interesting because facial anatomy, people have very different conceptions of embouchure. Some people now say, well, you really have to look at the whole apparatus through the mouth, the shape of the jaw, the teeth, the tongue, all this stuff to be able to assess an embouchure. And for me, if I see someone with embouchure problems, as you know, Frankie, I'll tend to go from the ground up. I will look at posture, breathing, all sorts of things, because just making an outlet with your lips that's at the right shape and tension to vibrate, you still have to have the air coming through at the right intensity. But it's an interesting series of muscles that kind of depend on each other, and timing is really important to get a really responsive embouchure.
Yeah, great. So in terms of healthy embouchure, are there any hallmarks of what a healthy or an unhealthy embouchure might look or feel like?
I would say, simplistically speaking, from, I guess, our observational view, we shouldn't see a lot of action happening. It's a very sophisticated apparatus, but it's very sequential. And if things happen in the right order, by the time we're looking for the outside, we shouldn't see a lot of aberrant movements. I shouldn't see people chewing a note. Like if I see the jaw moving around as they're shifting through the register, that's a red flag to me that there's something not working. We shouldn't see that. We shouldn't see a lot of strain of these kind of muscles, like at the neck here, because if we see these muscles tensing, it's a sign your jaw is really tense, to cut a long story short. And jaws are made for, sure, we use these structures like our chin and our skull as scaffolding, if you like, to support the embouchure, but they're in no way designed to control aperture at all. So if we overuse jaws, you're in big trouble. Jaws are made for, chewing steaks and doing big, strong things, not for subtly manipulating air.
Yeah, great. What do you think the most common misconceptions about the embouchure are? I mean, going through a complete embouchure rebuild with you, the things you were telling me were, as we've often talked about, it was like myth busting. It's like I'd never heard of that from any teacher or read it in any book or anything. So I've got my own kind of ideas, but I'd love to hear what you've seen. A lot of brass players come to you, and I reckon you have some great misconceptions.
The first one is that you should just relax and blow. I am all about you using your body efficiently and using the right amount to get the right effect, and that happens from timing and very sophisticated control. If it was just as simple as relaxing and blowing, there'd be a lot of, Olympic swimmers who could automatically play a French horn. It's not like that. It's actually quite a important control. So that's a terrible misconception. It leads to a lot of guilt. This is the reason I don't like it. Is, of course, we want to get to the point where you're not working your muscles harder than you need to get the job done. That's our, if you like, that's what we do in sport, right? We get everyone to a really great state so that you can use the muscles as well as you can for as long as you need to. So that's just makes people feel bad about themselves when they have problems, because they just relax and blow. And from my perspective, often like half the muscles aren't working in the mouth or something, and that's not relaxing. Your body goes into stress and creates compensations. The other thing that along these lines is that it's all air. You shouldn't have to think about your embouchure. This is not the case. We've done studies looking at the muscle activities to see whether there was a connection between what you did with your embouchure and what you did with your breathing. To a little bit of an extent, if you're playing really loud, it might have to engage a bit firmer to maintain its structure, but there's not some breath controls the embouchure. That's not the case at all. The second thing is I feel like people say, oh, it's like you shouldn't think about your face muscles. It's like unlucky or something. You think, this is crazy. This is your instrument. Of course you should think about it, not while you're playing. What you should do is in your practice room, think about it, look at it, make sure it's all in good working order so that when you go on stage, everything's working. It's very reassuring. Lots and lots of people have problems. They feel guilty. There's a terrible stigma about your embouchure not working. They try and relax, and usually it doesn't work more. They blow harder through a lopsided, dysfunctional embouchure and start squeezing all the wrong muscles desperately, trying to make it work. So it's just an absolute misconception that you don't have face muscles that work when you play. This is just incredible. Naive.
I guess from a musician's point of view, like I've heard a lot of colleagues say this idea of paralysis by analysis, and a lot of healthy musicians, they're playing fine and they don't want to think about what's going on, but it's almost only when you do have an injury or when something goes wrong, all of a sudden you have to think about these things, and in that discovery you realize, oh, I wish I'd known this when I was a healthy musician. So it's a tricky one. Yeah.
Well, it's not that tricky. It's just I don't understand fundamentally why people have this idea that thinking about it is bad. Then this is what I really struggle with, because actually if you have good control of your equipment, part of which is your face and your air and all sorts of stuff, then you're going to be able to really control your playing. It's incredibly empowering. So the analysis paralysis thing is just a bit naive. You shouldn't be, as you're playing a phrase and going for some dynamic kind of effect, be thinking about in a performance situation, you're not at that point thinking, oh, yes, now I need to do X, Y, or Z. That should have all been done in your practice room, that you develop these skills so you know how to really control and nuance these. Because, at the top level of performance, as you know, I mean, the more you're able to have more, if you like, pathways or freedom to make musical expression in more ways than you had before. I mean, this is what it's about, really. It enhances your performance.
Yeah, 100%. So if we're talking about embouchure dysfunction or injuries in general, what have you noticed tends to happen, and to whom is this happening to?
To be honest, it happens across the age span. I once had a brass player very early on say to me, "How come brass players don't keep playing into old age?" And I would say some of that relates to not cross training, if you like not doing some exercises to keep them in shape. It's quite often you may be playing into a certain way where you don't keep the breadth of your kind of muscle control and things there, and that's just something as simple as an off instrument or in the practice room doing a simple bit of training once a week. It's not terribly onerous. The other thing that happens is that is this idea of fatigue. So what we want to do is we want to work muscles until they're tired. When they're tired, so you usually might feel that they're shaking a little bit, or you're having trouble maintaining a note. You might start to break in the note or something. At that point, you need to stop, because when you're fatigued, you're fatigued. I mean, you just have to rest, let your muscles recover for about 10 minutes and then build up again. People have this idea instead that they must go on, must get stronger. I mean, if you're fatigued and those muscles are chopped, you are going to use other muscles to get the job done. This has huge consequences. So if you can't keep the round muscle around your mouth, orbicularis oris, like your puckering muscle, if you can't keep that muscle engaged when you're making an embouchure and it starts to fall apart, you'll start to clench your jaw and over widen your mouth. And then you start to see things. This is very common in like kids entering first year music studies, where they suddenly ramp up their practice or panic practice before exams, or there's sudden jumps in practice. Your body's just not fit for that jump. And then you run the risk, if you overload and you start really spreading your embouchure, for example, because that orbicularis, the muscle that makes the nice round shape of your lips, if that muscle fatigues, you start spreading it, you can tear your muscle. And I've seen tear that round muscle, the orbicularis. Particularly the most common place is under the nose here, where there's between the sort of two meaty bits of the muscle on each side of your mouth. In the center there, particularly on the upper lip, there's quite a like a ligamenty kind of bit, like this bit of connective tissue that's not so meaty, and people tear it, like quite nasty tears, and they're very upsetting for a student to think, why did I tear my face? And often it comes from playing through fatigue, and just you have a tired muscle then you're overstretching because you can't use it anymore. So yeah, nasty tears can happen.
Yeah. I think from a musician's point of view, when you've got fatigue, or remembering back to when I was in first year, the musician's mentality is, if something's wrong, you keep practicing until you get it right. Or if you're feeling good, you keep practicing because you want to stay in that mode. But we don't have this attitude of an athlete, like high intensity rest, low intensity rest.
It's what it is too. Stop at the top. I mean, if there was a simple phrase, stop at the top. Like really, when it sounds great and fantastic, pat yourself on the back, go get a glass of water, let your brain process what you've been doing, refuel a bit, and then go back to it. Fantastic. Your brain is fermenting what happens. So if you play through fatigue, when you swap muscles can only do certain jobs. So if your muscle says, bye, I'm finished, I'm too tired, you're going to swap to another muscle. This is a big repercussion, because muscles don't do the same thing. They don't just suddenly become the other muscle. They do something completely different. So what you're training, if you play through fatigue instead of to fatigue, you're actually teaching the wrong thing to happen. You're embedding, if you like, bad habits.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, when you're going through retraining someone, what works when it comes to the embouchure specifically? What are you finding that's working when you're working with someone?
Uh, I think
I mean, everyone's
first yeah, no, firstly, to be honest, I think education is quite important. I do know the
mm,
myths that are out there. I know the fear that's out there talking about muscles. I
mm,
do a lot of things off the instrument and say to people, look, I go to the gym to exercise my shoulders, not because I walk around the street carrying a barbell. I mean, you have to get in your head that exercise is cross training. Like you cycle, for example, like you might want to get your you're a horn player, so that it kind of helps your abdominal muscle strength anyway, but you need good abdominal muscle strength when you're doing
yeah,
serious cycling or you fall all over the seat. This is kind of the thing, this idea of cross training where you increase your capacity so that you don't have to work hard in the game, so that you don't get fatigued as quickly. These kind of things are just foundational. So firstly, I guess I would say education, just saying, look,
mm,
I have these lovely things, like for those of you looking, these facial models where I say, look, there are muscles here, and you actually have to learn to control them because, for example, on this, I'm showing people there are loads and loads of muscles that attach to the corner of your mouth. It's very confusing to be trying to think of corners where in Latin terms, the corner of your mouth is called the modiolus, which is like the hub of a wheel, because it's getting pulled in every direction. That's how we make faces. Like we can turn the corners of our mouth up, down, widen, or we can anchor them in towards our teeth using the muscle inside our mouth. So I think some of the words that are used aren't terribly helpful either. So trying to get people to have an idea of the three-dimensional shape of their face, the job of the different muscles, and then the order that they need to contract in is kind of how I have to go about it. It's not a nice, simple answer, but I guess one thing musicians generally know is they need that round muscle to have some kind of endurance or strength. This orbicularis, the one that kind of makes your aperture smaller in your lips. However, often as soon as they go to play, they just let it go. It just completely undoes, and that's a problem because the muscle that kind of makes the inside of your mouth smaller also attaches to the corners of your mouth. If your mouth muscle, the one that makes it smaller and rounder, collapses as soon as you puff air out of your mouth, squeezing those corners, you'll end up with this big wide smile kind of in your embouchure, which then, of course, is going to lead to air leak problems or lack of control over that aperture size. So understanding the kind of timing of the really fundamental mechanics of embouchure is the first thing. So I have to say, I feel like I have to educate people and get them not to panic that they have face muscles
mm,
after all, and
yeah,
that they use.
yeah. It's quite triggering that the way you explain it, just like flat and spread and stuff. That's what I remember when I came to you when I was injured. It just felt like I had no muscles, and it turned out I didn't.
Exactly.
Everything was so weak. And even now, like in my job, and if there's something stressful, it's almost now that with that knowledge that you're talking about, that education, I can scan the body, check in, and I know what muscle is not firing or not doing its job properly, and go, oh, okay, no, that just needs to activate a little bit more for me to be able to make this sound or to get to that register or
Right. So,
um,
so it's actually empowering. It's not analysis is
mm,
paralysis. It's analyzing in a way where you have to think through it, and it's a bit hard if you've been playing a certain way and never thought about it to kind of consider it that way. I mean, it should just be kind of foundational as you learn. But once you do, it's incredibly empowering. You're not just,
mm.
oh gosh, I hope I make it through the week. You kind of know what to do.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess the Embouchure Project, these podcasts that we want to do, are not only going to be for people that have injuries like I did, or we want it to be for the medical profession to better educate not only them, but for teachers all around the world, but also for healthy players. Like what would you say healthy players really need to know? What do you think healthy players need to know? And what what goals do you see the Embouchure Project bringing to the world of not only brass playing but musicians in general?
So what I always say to healthy players is, when I started working with embouchures, this was musicians begging me to work with embouchures. It wasn't my idea that, yes, I wanted to burst into the field of embouchure. It was all these people with terrible problems and having to learn a lot. I did so much research myself to come up with these ideas. They're very grounded on very fundamental principles of anatomy and physiology and things like this. So that's what I tell them. So this is just grounded on how bodies work. It's a normal situation to use your muscles in this particular way. There are muscles there like any elite person. If you're an aspiring musician or an elite musician, you should be keeping it in good order. You go and get your horn serviced, treat it like facial service, right? You should be. I always say to people, I'd rather that you had some idea what was going on in your face if for some unfortunate reason, like fainting and hitting your face, perhaps, Frankie, has happened to you. If something happened to happen to your embouchure, and there's been walking into glass doors, like there's all sorts of crazy things brass players or wind players can do, nothing to do with playing as well, that might affect it. You want to know what you're working back to. I mean, everyone who comes in, I say, well, what was your embouchure like beforehand? And usually no one can tell me other than I played a bit to the left or something maybe. But no one actually knows anything about it. So I tend to feel that I'm rebuilding things from the ground up. Whereas, for example, if for some reason you've overused it because the conductor was just being, sort of demanding this kind of maybe in one rehearsal or something, you can think, oh, I've really overworked my orbicularis. I need to do some rest. I need to do some gentle exercises, maybe have some salt or icing to take that swelling out of it. I need to rehab it, get it recovering. So in a couple of days, it's better. This is, super important. So I think that they should have a facial hygiene. So it's like brushing your teeth. You use this stuff for your job. You should check in, make sure it's all working. I had one very well-known trombone player who'd been to the dentist to have some, root canal or something ghastly done to her jaw. And she just happened to be coming to a study we were doing where we did this MRI looking inside the head, and her muscles on the inside of her mouth had turned off as a result of the pain and the surgery. And she was back playing. The tooth stuff was fixed, but the muscles weren't working. It was just by sheer luck she came to us and she could get it working again. But people should be just making sure it's all in good working order. It's seriously face hygiene. It's like, everyone who's an elite athlete would go to the gym to keep up good condition or flexibility or dexterity. It should just be that it's all fine. Just a check-in.
No,
so professionals are saying check in regularly. If you've got a big blow coming up, like some of these Star Wars programs or whatever we've had recently, you can pre-prepare by maybe doing a little bit of extra chops work at night time to try and just give them a bit of extra strength in the tank. Strengthening is very dependent. People panic about being too strong in their embouchure. And I keep saying, but if you've got X amount of strength, if you just have to use less force. So say if you're so weak that you're using 100% of your muscles every time you play, you're really vulnerable to injuring it. If you've got some good strength there and you're only using 10% of your strength when you play, then you've got heaps in the bank. Like this is the sort of thing. It's not that by being tons stronger you still want to use 100%. That's not the idea. The idea is by being stronger you use a lot less.
No, that's right. And you can feel a bit more in control when you're being forced to do 2 Star Wars in one day now, which is quite normal, and to have that confidence in your process, knowing, okay, I can do this in a controlled environment. Anyway, we could talk for hours, Bronwen, as we do. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and really excited about the future and other people that we're going to talk to here at the Embouchure Project, and really excited to share some of the exercises that you've come up with and that have been helping not only me but hundreds of players around the world. So thank you very much.
Lovely to chat, Frankie, and I'm very happy to to share knowledge as we can. It's great.
Yeah, legend. All right, talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Embouchure Project podcast with me, Frankie Lacerda. The strength of this project is our network, so please go to the embouchureproject.org to sign up for our mailing list, follow us on Instagram, and join our group on Facebook. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@theembouchureproject.org. We look forward to hearing from you.